Ancient Epic, Eros and Psyche. Topic: Eros and Psyche. The painful lesson of trust in Roman culture. Most of us know the story of the god of love and the princess, a romantic ballad with a happy ending. But this is not a fairy tale. This is a spiritual murder case, a painful lesson in trust, written during one of the most turbulent periods of the Roman Empire. What is worse, living in darkness with perfect love, or betraying that trust to uncover a truth that might destroy you? The story of Eros and Psyche is not just mythology. It is a philosophical metaphor packaged in a Roman novel, dissecting the deepest concepts of desire, the soul, and divine jealousy. We will not retell it. We will investigate its true origins, the cultural context that created it, and why it became the greatest story of the soul's redemption in the ancient world. If you want to uncover the biggest mysteries, the deepest analyses of ancient history, hit subscribe and turn on notifications immediately. The ancient epic community is the place for true historical investigators. Let's begin with the most beautiful woman who ever challenged the gods. This story is not from Homer or ancient Greece. It first appears in the work The Golden Ass, written by the Roman writer and philosopher Apuleius in the 2nd century A.D. This is crucial. It was written during a time when Eastern cults, particularly the beliefs surrounding Isis and Osiris, were challenging traditional Roman deities. This is the context of a crisis of faith. Part 1. The Curse of Beauty and the Religious Challenge. Psyche, the religious threat Psyche, whose name in Greek means soul, was beautiful beyond all boundaries. People began to worship her as a goddess, forgetting Venus, Aphrodite. This is not just jealousy. For the Romans, this was a supreme sin, sacrilege. The goddess Venus was jealous not only of the lost devotion, but because the divine order was being broken. A mortal who achieved divine perfection was a threat to the foundation of Roman religion. Venus commanded Eros, the god of desire, love, to make Psyche fall in love with a hideous creature, aiming to bring the soul down to the lowest status, thus restoring order. Eros's mistake and jealousy. And here is the crucial twist. Eros, the god of desire, accidentally wounded himself with his own arrow. Desire cannot control itself. The god of love, the one presumed to hold all emotional power, became a victim of his own making. Eros fell in love with Psyche. Desire loves the soul. And because of this love, he forbade anyone else from loving her. The consequence: Psyche's solitude was not a divine punishment, but the exclusive control of desire. She could not marry because Eros could not bear the soul belonging to anyone but himself. The prophecy of the monster. The prophecy from the Oracle of Delphi is one of the most shocking parts. She shall marry a winged monster who ravages everything with fire and sword. Eros was not a monster. He was the god of love, Amor. But to the world, desire was seen as something terrifying, irrational, and capable of destroying order. When the soul united with desire, even divine, it was still a horrific marriage in the eyes of society. Psyche was abandoned on the cliff, a marriage funeral. But when the west wind Zephyr gently lifted her, we know that this intervention was not the end, but the turning point for the soul to meet love. Part 2. The Covenant of Darkness and the Test of Trust. The Invisible Palace. Tangible perfection. Psyche awoke in a splendid palace where objects served themselves and invisible voices were the servants. Eros's love was perfect, providing everything for the soul. But it lacked one single element, a tangible presence. This poses the core philosophical question: what does the soul need? Psyche had wealth, service, and passionate love every night. But she lacked physical proof of that love. For humans, faith always needs to be reinforced by reality. The curse of darkness, the test of faith. The covenant of darkness was the prerequisite for the marriage. Eros demanded that Psyche accept love based on feeling and absolute trust, not on sight. This is a common motif in the mystery cults in Rome, where initiates had to undergo rites in darkness, and enlightenment, revelation, only came after they proved unwavering faith. Requiring Psyche not to look at her husband was the ultimate test for the soul. If Psyche looked at Eros, she would transform desire, Eros, from a mystical, sublime force into a mortal who could be controlled and identified. The soul must learn to trust love, not own it. The return of jealousy, the sister's trap. When Psyche missed home and Eros agreed to let her visit her family, again, proving the love and trust of the god of desire. However, her return as a wealthy queen only ignited the fire of jealousy in her two sisters. The two sisters are not side characters. They are the embodiment of Psyche's ego and doubt. The story is about to enter its climax, where the soul must face its most agonizing choice. If you are finding this content valuable, one click of your subscribe button will help Ancient Epic continue to shed light on these mysteries. We need your support to keep history alive. The night of betrayal. The two sisters planted the malicious curse in Psyche's mind. He is the monster from the prophecy. He will devour you. Doubt prevails. In the darkness, Psyche held a knife and an oil lamp, the tools of destruction. The knife symbolizes the intent to kill, but more importantly, the light, symbolizing mortal reason, shining upon the divine mystery. Part 3. The injury to trust and the collapse of love. The truth revealed and the hot oil. When the lamp's light shone, Psyche did not see a monster, but Eros, the god of love, an indescribable beauty, with glittering wings and golden and silver arrows. The soul had found the truth, but in a forbidden way. The collapse. She forgot the knife, overwhelmed. But a drop of hot oil accidentally fell from the lamp and touched Eros's shoulder. The hot oil is mortal reason, fascinated by tangible truth, which inflicted suffering upon divine love. It was the moment the soul had betrayed the covenant. The accusation and the departure. Eros woke up, not from physical pain, but from the shattering of trust. The god of desire's final words were the deepest accusation. I asked one thing of you, and you could not do it. And so, you shall never see me again. Meaning, divine love cannot exist if it is doubted and sought to be controlled by the soul. Eros flew away, not as an abandonment, but as the natural consequence of the soul, destroying the bond itself. The consequence of jealousy. The two sisters, hearing the news of Eros's departure, thought their chance had come. They leaped from the cliff, hoping Zephyr would carry them to the palace. But the west wind refused, because their actions stemmed from greed and jealousy, not love. This was a swift but important punishment. It confirmed that the jealous would never attain divine favor. The soul's ordeal Psyche, the injured soul, began her journey of atonement. She wandered everywhere, begging the help of other goddesses, but no one dared oppose Venus. Finally, she had to face Venus, the direct punishment of the challenged goddess of beauty. Venus did not kill Psyche, but forced her to complete 4 impossible tasks. Part 4. The 4 Tasks of Redemption, Tasks 1 and 2. Sorting Seeds and Golden Fleece, Task 1. Sort a huge pile of mixed seeds in one night. This is a task of patience and order. Who helped her? A swarm of ants. Meaning, for the soul to be redeemed, it must learn to use small diligence and organization to overcome life's huge chaos. Task 2. Obtain the golden fleece from the ferocious sheep. The advice? A reed by the river advised her to wait until the sheep slept, then collect the wool caught on the branches, meaning the soul must learn wisdom, patience, and prudence instead of brute force. Task 3. The water of the Styx. Task 3. Fill a flask with the water of the river Styx, the river of unbreakable vows and death. This task was impossible for a mortal. Who helped her? The eagle of Zeus, meaning, to achieve final redemption, the soul needed the intervention of the divine at the highest level, Zeus, Jupiter, rising above the jealousy of Venus. Task 4. The box of beauty from the underworld. Task 4. Bring back the box containing the beauty of Persephone from the underworld to Venus. This was the final and most dangerous test. She had to travel through hell. The aid. A tower advised her on the route, how to bribe the ferryman Charon and the 3-headed dog Cerberus. Meaning, the tower is accumulated wisdom, the experience learned from past failures. The final mistake. On the way back, the soul's old curiosity returned. Psyche thought, if this beauty is for Venus, why not a little for myself? She opened the box. Inside was not beauty, but a sleep of death, lethargy. The soul collapsed, falling into a deep sleep. Analysis. Curiosity and the desire to possess divine beauty almost destroyed the soul. Part 5. The redemption and the philosophical allegory Love Saves the Soul. Eros, recovered from the burn, could not bear to see the soul he loved destroyed. Divine love returned to rescue the soul. Eros woke her from the deathly sleep. Eros appeals to Zeus. Eros did not just return independently. He flew to Olympus and begged Jupiter, Zeus, for Psyche's immortality, meaning the final union between the soul and desire could not happen on its own. It needed the approval of the supreme power, Zeus. The divine marriage and philosophical meaning. Jupiter convened a meeting of the gods. Venus accepted, and Psyche was given ambrosia, transforming her into the goddess of the soul. The ending, the soul, Psyche, and love, desire, Eros, were finally united. They had a daughter named Voluptas, pleasure, bliss, anal, fine or analysis. This is Apuleius's message. To achieve bliss, Voluptas, humanity must undergo a painful journey where the soul, Psyche, must learn to trust love, Eros, unconditionally, overcoming doubt, jealousy, and the desire for material possession. The story of Eros and Psyche is not just a myth, it is the hero's journey in psychological philosophy. It teaches us that the soul must travel through the hell of doubt to prove itself worthy of divine love. What do you think of Psyche's choice? Would you have opened that oil lamp? Comment below, share your thoughts, and join the historical debate with us. Don't forget to subscribe to the Ancient Epic channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our deep analyses of humanity's greatest legacies. See you in the next epic. Ancient Epic, The Self-Destruction of Athens. Topic: How Athens Lost the Peloponnesian War. Democracy's most costly mistake. They had the strongest navy. They controlled nearly 300 city-states, collecting immense amounts of gold and silver every year. They possessed the most enlightened democracy, where philosophy and art reached unprecedented heights. Yet, they destroyed themselves. This was not a mere military defeat. This was a political suicide that spanned nearly 3 decades. What turned Athens from the dominant power of the Mediterranean into a starving, besieged ruin? The answer doesn't lie in Sparta, but within Athens itself. It is the cruel truth about power, the ignorance of the masses, and the fundamental flaw of democracy when faced with prolonged warfare. We are not telling a battle story. We are investigating how a great civilization choked the life out of its own ideals. If you want to uncover the fatal weaknesses of ancient empires and delve into the deepest analyses of historical decisions, hit subscribe and turn on notifications immediately. The Ancient Epic community is the place for true historical investigators. Let's dissect the greatest war that completely changed the fate of Greece. The inevitable clash, the Peloponnesian War, was more than just Sparta against Athens. It was the unavoidable confrontation between two ideologies. On one side was the Delian League led by Athens: democracy, naval power, commerce, culture. Flexible, innovative, yet arrogant. On the other side was the Peloponnesian League led by Sparta: autocracy, land army, agriculture, discipline. Slow, cautious, but persistent. Everyone knew who was stronger at sea and who was stronger on land. The challenge was not to find the superior opponent, but to find which will would endure longer. Part 1. Pericles' strategy and the first cracks. The genius and the trap of the walls. Athens' initial strategy was a masterpiece by Pericles. He understood clearly. Athens could not defeat Sparta on land. Therefore, he devised the fortress strategy. What was the fortress strategy? It involved withdrawing the entire rural population of Attica behind the formidable long walls connecting Athens to its port, Piraeus. The farmlands were abandoned for the Spartan army to devastate. In return, Athens would use its superior navy to control trade routes, raid Peloponnesian coastal cities, and economically exhaust Sparta. This was a genius strategy. It turned Athens' naval advantage into its sole weapon, neutralizing Sparta's land power. The devastation within the walls. But this genius contained a terrible flaw: congestion. When tens of thousands of people from the countryside flooded the city, they lived in crowded, unsanitary conditions. For the first time in its history, Athens was defeated not by the sword, but by a terrible plague, possibly typhoid or a form of hemorrhagic fever. Pericles, the creator of the strategy, was one of the first victims. Pericles' death was an irreparable disaster. It wasn't just the loss of a leader, it was the loss of a disciplined vision. Pericles was the only one with enough authority to control the Athenian democratic masses. After him, Athenian democracy became a ship without a rudder, easily manipulated by demagogues. The rise of Cleon and the age of demagogues. As fear and despair mounted, the voice of reason quieted. Instead, Cleon, an ambitious and aggressive leather manufacturer, rose to prominence. Cleon was the embodiment of demagoguery. He had no military experience, but he had the loudest voice and the surest promises. He pushed for brutal, punitive policies against rebellious city-states. Under Cleon, democracy was no longer a place for discussion to find what was right, but where the loudest and angriest sought to impose their will. This was the first crack. Part 2. The Suicidal Decision. The Sicilian Disaster. The Trap of Unending Greed. The brief period of peace, the Peace of Nicias, was merely the lull before the storm. But for Athens, peace was not enough. They always had to seek expansion to feed their war machine and maintain their reputation. And then, Sicily emerged, a distant, wealthy island, home to the powerful city of Syracuse. The Athenians were seduced by the promise of unlimited gold and power if they conquered it. This was a strategic madness. It violated Pericles' basic principle: never risk core resources. The key figure, Alcibiades. The driving force behind this expedition was Alcibiades, a military genius, handsome, wealthy, but utterly immoral. Alcibiades was a symbol of Athenian arrogance. He didn't just want victory, he wanted a spectacular, personal, and dangerous victory. He promised a Western empire that would elevate Athens to ultimate glory. The masses, captivated by Alcibiades, agreed to send a colossal fleet, the largest offensive force Athens had ever assembled. This was a gamble that put the entire future of Athens on the table. The horrific betrayal. Just before the fleet departed, a major religious scandal erupted involving Alcibiades. Instead of facing trial, Alcibiades fled to Sparta and became a strategic advisor to his own enemy. This is one of the greatest betrayals in history. In a highly secretive strategic meeting with the Spartans, Alcibiades advised them to, first, send elite Spartan troops to Sicily to aid Syracuse. Second, occupy a fortress near Athens, Delian, to establish a permanent base on Attic soil. Alcibiades' advice was a fatal double blow. It turned the Sicilian expedition into a disaster and plunged Athens into a state of perpetual siege on its own land. The Syracuse disaster. The Athenian fleet arrived in Sicily but lacked decisive leadership. The Spartans arrived in time. The conflict dragged into a tiresome siege. The Athenian democratic masses, instead of retreating when faced with difficulties, continued to send more reinforcements, money, and warships. One wrong decision followed another, all driven by rigid honor and a refusal to accept reality. The result? The entire Athenian fleet was destroyed. Over 40,000 elite soldiers, sailors, and citizens were captured, starved, or sold into slavery. This was an irrecoverable loss in terms of manpower and morale. The Sicilian disaster destroyed Athens' military power, but it was their arrogance that ultimately ruined their will. If you are finding this content valuable, one click of your subscribe button will help Ancient Epic continue to shed light on these mysteries. Part 3. The Persian Intervention and Economic Exhaustion. The Siege from Delian. While Sicily was unfolding, the Spartans followed Alcibiades' advice and occupied Delian. This was an economic catastrophe. Previously, the Spartans only raided Attica for a few weeks each year. Now, they were there year-round. This meant, first, over 20,000 enslaved people working in the silver mines, a vital financial resource, escaped and joined Sparta. Second, all agricultural supply lines were cut off. Athens had to import all food through the port of Piraeus. Athens switched to an absolute war economy, using emergency reserves. The role of the outside empire. The Peloponnesian War was no longer just a Greek conflict. It became an international war when the great Persian Empire intervened. Persia, the perennial enemy of both Athens and Sparta, watched the war with interest. Seeing that Sparta was running out of funds to build a large fleet that could challenge Athens, Persia opened its coffers. Persian money was the deciding factor. It allowed Sparta to fund sailors and constantly build new ships. Although Athens had superior sailors, they were financially exhausted, while Sparta could endlessly pump money from the rival empire. The internal crisis. Desperation led to a political coup. For a brief period, Athenian democracy was overthrown by an oligarchy. Although democracy was quickly restored, the event showed how much faith in the government had collapsed. Athens's resilience was astonishing. They continued to fight, building new ships from their last reserves. But they were fighting against an army that never ran out of money, Sparta backed by Persia, and a mentally exhausted population. Part 4. The Final Battle and the Eternal Lesson. The Battle of Aegospotami. The moment of collapse. After years of weary fighting, the final battle took place at Aegospotami on the Hellespont Strait, Athens' vital grain supply route. The Spartans, under the talented leadership of Lysander, employed patience. He lured the Athenian fleet out daily, feigning retreat. The Athenians, exhausted and overconfident in their naval prowess, grew careless. On one fateful afternoon, as the Athenian sailors scattered on the shore searching for food, Lysander launched a surprise attack. The battle ended almost instantly. All 180 Athenian warships were captured or destroyed. Most sailors and generals were killed or executed. This was the ultimate defeat. Athens's food supply was cut off. The navy, the only component keeping the city alive, was gone. The unglorious end, no further siege was necessary. Lysander simply blockaded the port. Athens, starving and sick, had to surrender unconditionally. The terms of surrender were a humiliation. The long walls had to be demolished. The Spartan army marched into the city, and Athenian citizens, who had fought stubbornly for nearly 3 decades, watched as the symbol of their democracy and freedom was destroyed. The lasting lesson about democracy. Athens' downfall was the failure of unrestrained democracy in wartime. Athenian democracy failed not because it lacked talent. It had Pericles, Alcibiades, Nicias, but because its system could not maintain discipline and long-term vision. Mass persuasion. Demagogues like Cleon could drive disastrous strategies based on emotion, hatred, and false promises. Arrogance. The arrogance of the masses led to the Sicilian expedition, a gamble that a cautious autocratic regime likely would have refused. Emotional reaction. When facing defeat, democracy did not retreat to preserve itself, but desperately tried to throw more futile resources into the disaster. Athens was not defeated by Sparta's absolute strength, but by a continuous string of poor decisions passed by mob mentality and unyielding arrogance. They fought to defend freedom, but in the process, they undermined the very reason and prudence that freedom demands. The Peloponnesian War is an eternal warning. Greatness does not guarantee survival. Even the highest ideals can be destroyed by the very people who claim to defend them. Athens' collapse is a great tragedy, but also an invaluable lesson. What do you think about Alcibiades' role? Could Athens have won if Pericles had lived longer? Comment below, share your thoughts, and join the historical debate with us. Don't forget to subscribe to the Ancient Epic channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our deep analyses of humanity's greatest legacies. See you in the next epic.